I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Dylan Johnson back to the show today. Dylan is always a super popular guest, but much more in demand this time after his top 10 ride in the biggest gravel race in the world, Unbound. Today, I want to peel back the curtain behind that, find out exactly what training Dylan done in preparation for his top 10 at Unbound, and really go deep on his equipment setup. What difference does tyre choice make? What difference does drivetrain efficiency make? My goal with this is to give you the tools to optimize your gravel bike and your gravel training for your next performance. With all that being said, welcome to the show, Mr. Dylan Johnson. Dylan Johnson, welcome back to the Roadman podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun last time, so I'm happy to be back.
Round two, you're in that honourable list of guests. It's getting quite esteemed. I'm happy to say Greg LeMond is a two-time guest along with yourself. So that's nice company.
Yeah, that's probably where the comparisons between the two of us stop.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, LeMond never finished top 10 at Unbound.
Right. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Is it a validation for a lot of the hard work you've been putting in behind the scenes, a lot of the geeking out on training and equipment?
Yeah, no doubt. I think a lot of people picked up on that at the end of my video that I made. I was talking about, some of these weird equipment choices that I make, and it's not just for Unbound. It's been for multiple races, like Leadville last year. I ran a drop bar bike, and I've been running mountain bike tires for gravel races for a while now. And no doubt, there's a lot of people that think some of the weird equipment choices I make are dumb, or I'm paying too much attention to my equipment, or I just need to focus on my training, which I already focus a ton on my training. If you look at most of my channel, that's what most of my channel is dedicated to. But I said this at the end of my video, but a good result doesn't necessarily prove anything to me, because amazing riders get great results all the time with suboptimal equipment. It's usually the same suboptimal equipment that everyone else in the race is using, so it doesn't really prove anything. And also, you can have a good or bad day on suboptimal equipment or optimal equipment. It doesn't necessarily mean it was the equipment that did it. But for a lot of people, I know that a result speaks for itself. So I was happy to get it done, especially putting out the bike video before the race and making such a big deal about how this was aero tested and all of this. It really came together nicely there.
Because was there a danger, maybe even in the back of your mind, that insecurity voice that crops up for all of us from time to time, saying that, Dylan, this is your gig now. You're the guy who puts out the videos around shaving, excess pieces off tires. Mm-hmm. And when the real racing comes, when it comes to the final, you're just not there. You're just not good enough. And then this result quietens that voice and said, shut up. Like, I'm a bike racer and the other stuff is the extra, not the opposite way around.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I'm competing at a level where I'm obviously not the best racer there. I'm not the most genetically gifted racer in the Lifetime Grand Prix by a long shot. And the way that I've always thought about this is I'm gonna give myself every advantage that I can to be as high up as I possibly can be. And I know that putting mountain bike tires on your gravel bike is not going to make you go from 25th place to first place, obviously, but I think I don't know, that's sometimes what people, I don't want to say that's what people expect, but there's always comments like, oh, well, if your bike is so supposedly optimized, like, why are you never on the podium? So it is a little bit of validation for sure.
If you could come 10th, you can win the race.
What's that?
If you could come 10th place, you can win the race. Like, yeah. Lachlan is not genetically the best rider in that group either.
I agree. I think that both Lachlan and Chad, like, they really played that move very smart. They recognized what was going on in the pack. They recognized that riders were not willing to work. There was a lot of playing games. The group was not very cohesive. Both of them recognized that. Both of them made a very smart move to go off the front, and we continued to play games with each other. And I mean, I think that two of the smartest bike racers in the race won. Not and this is no knock on Lachlan and Chad, but I think it was two of the smartest bike racers, not necessarily two of the strongest bike racers that day.
He wasn't that smart though. He went the wrong way at one point.
That's true. That's true.
Is there a situation developing where it's conversely, the stronger the field gets, the more likely it's going to be for you to pull off a win like this? Because we're starting to see, like we've seen Greg Van Avermaet, Matej Mohoric, more the Bahrain team coming over. Keegan's obviously a superstar in the gravel scene as it is. So there's a lot of looking at each other. And tactically now, there's opportunity for those big hitters to cancel each other out and see, you know, it's hard to label Lachlan an underdog, but I think physiologically compared to some of those other engines, he is an underdog. It's given more opportunity for that underdog attack to go clear.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah. I think I always thought of Unbound as a very steady effort where, you know, you're kind of doing your tempo power for most of the day or as long as you can. And I would say that for the first time, at least that I can remember, it wasn't like that at all. It played out much more like a road race. It was much more tactical than it's ever been. Usually it's a race of attrition where the front group just continues to get smaller and smaller throughout the day. And then whoever's left at the end battles for the win, either in a sprint finish or in a final attack. And it was still a race of attrition. It's always going to be somewhat a race of attrition, but tactics won the race. I mean, doing some sort of breakaway far out from the finish won the race. So it was much more tactical than it's ever been.
What was your power like for the day?
Oh boy, I think it was 283 normalized power for 915 or 916 or whatever the race was.
That's spicy. What weight are you?
70 kilos.
70 kilos.
Yeah.
That is a heavy day on the ticket.
Yeah, it was no doubt the highest power output I've ever seen for Unbound, and I've done Unbound 5 times now. Interestingly enough, I mentioned this in my video as well, but 10th place is actually not the highest placing I've ever gotten at Unbound. The first time I did Unbound in 2018, I placed 9th. But that's still to this day my slowest finishing time. And I looked it up because I wanted to see what my time was. It was my time in 2018 to get 9th place was 11 hours and 39 minutes. This year to get 10th place, it was 9 hours and 16 minutes.
That's basically highlights the evolution of the American gravel scene over that period.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's it like racing with Matej Mohoric and Greg Van Avermaet? I know when I've raced races in Europe, road races, and you have like some of the big stars going along, in a road race, you're almost terrified to knock these guys off going through corners and kermesses. You're like, do not take Van der Poel down. Do not take Van der Poel down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want to be that guy. Yeah, a little bit of that ran through my head when I was riding right up next to Mohoric. Mohoric seemed like he was trying to race the race smart. He seemed like he was trying to tuck in, not take a lot of wind. I didn't see him on the front a lot. He had a dropper post with him, and on the downhills, he would actually set his dropper post down and try to get even more aero, save even more watts. Like I really saw him trying to save as much energy as possible. Unfortunately, he got a really bad flat tire about halfway through, which is just this race is kind of like Paris-Roubaix in that sense. It's a little bit of a lottery. Of course, you can choose the right equipment to make it more likely that you get through the race without a bad mechanical like that, but it is what it is. Van Avermaet, I think, also got flat tires, but was able to chase back to at least be in that same chase group that I was in. And I remember thinking, oh, man, Van Avermaet's in this group. A couple other riders were in the group that I knew were good sprinters, and I'm not a great sprinter. And we were coming to the line fighting for roughly 5th place through 13th place. And I made the split-second decision after the final little kicker to do an attack before the line because I didn't want to actually sprint against Van Avermaet and some of these other guys. It sort of worked. Van Avermaet caught me, and 2 other guys caught me, but I did hold off 3 riders, so ended up with 10th, and I was happy with that.
Pretty cool you get to talk about sprinting to the line with Van Avermaet, former Olympic champion.
Yeah, but if you look at that footage, it wasn't even close. Like his sprint was so much more powerful than mine. It's not even funny.
It is. You're talking about equipment and you're saying it's a lottery, but even though it's a lottery, it seems like the same guys never puncture. Like Keegan went on a ridiculous run of never having mechanicals or any type of punctures that influenced his race, like basically all last season. I know he crashed or slid out or something this year. But how important is that tire choice? And what, I know you ended up having a funky setup, but what did you roll for the race and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talked about this too. I mean, people can say that it's bad luck to get a puncture. And, you know, I mean, you can get a puncture with any tire. You could probably get a puncture with a downhill tire out there if you take completely the wrong line. But you can certainly mitigate the punctures by running the right equipment. And you know what I did is I ran mountain bike tires. I ran Conti Race King 2.2 mountain bike tires, which I think mitigates the puncture risk, no doubt, because it's a mountain bike tire, not a gravel tire. But I actually think that it's faster. And the reason why I think that is because there's 2 things that are affecting your speed when you're talking about tire choice. There's aerodynamics and there's rolling resistance. And obviously a wider tire is going to be less aerodynamic. And for a long time, people thought that a wider tire would have it would be slower in the rolling resistance department too. But I think people are coming around on that one and realizing that's incorrect especially when you're off road. But from an aerodynamic standpoint, we found out some really interesting things in the wind tunnel with Silka and Josh Portner with the Conti Race King. I don't know why this is the case, but it may be the texturing on the side of the Conti Race King, or maybe the knobs on the side are tripping the airflow as it goes around the tire. But the Conti Race King is a surprisingly aerodynamic mountain bike tire for whatever reason. With a deep section rim, it was about the same as a 45 mil gravel tire. And the Conti Race King on my deep section road wheels measures 53 millimeters, which kind of made, from an aerodynamic standpoint, that made it an obvious choice. And then the Conti Race King is, as far as rolling resistance goes, is quite a fast tire, partially just because they can utilize a thinner casing because the volume of the tire is so much wider than, say, a gravel tire that has to use a thicker casing to make up for the fact that the volume of the tire is so much lower. And generally a thinner casing means a faster tire. And that seems to be the case with the Conti Race King too. And independent testing, the Conti Race King is one of the fastest mountain bike tires that you can run. And it is faster than a lot of the gravel tires they have out there.
Hey Roadman, excuse the short interruption. I love riding the bike, but on account of being so busy with the podcast at the moment, I'm now what's called a time-crunched rider. I never thought I'd see the day. But I have a tool. I'm using Wattbike to keep myself sharp and on point with specific sessions to maximize that available training time. I have a Wattbike Atom right here in the recording studio beside me, and when I have an hour in between interviews, I jump on. It's removing all the friction points for me. There's no more 10-minute setup, unfolding legs, banging my knees off stuff, getting my hands dirty, the usual connection issues. It just works every single time. The Atom's perfect for virtual racing as well because it has crisp gear changes, it has 1% accuracy, and it has max gradient capability of up to 25%. If you're looking for an indoor trainer, I honestly couldn't recommend this any higher. I've been using a Wattbike since 2013. Honestly, it's the last indoor trainer that you're ever going to need. If you head on over to wattbike.com now and use code ROADMAN10, that's ROADMENTEN, and that's going to get you 10% off your Wattbike. Hydration packs, again, were something else that were really at the forefront of the race. You rode a hydration pack that was built into the jersey, which I looked at and I thought, oh, well, that's next level. Mm-hmm. And then I seen Lachlan wrote a hydration pack that was built into the front of the jersey, which if anyone's watching World Tour, you're seeing riders recently taking off their gilet and instead of putting it in their back pocket, they're stuffing it down the front of their jersey to close off that gap in the front, which is meant to be a lot faster. Was that something you guys didn't think of, or was there a reason you went for it behind?
Yeah, so I was running Rule 28's new gravel suit, and they're not the only company to come out with this. Keegan and Lachlan are sponsored by Rafa, and they had basically the same idea. As far as why we didn't put it in the front, I don't know. You'd have to ask Rule 28 about that. I did put a soft flask bottle in the front of my jersey, so I did actually have something there trying to take up the space, but I think we can give it to Lachlan for really thinking outside the box with actually putting a bladder down the front. That was probably the most aero solution.
It seems really uncomfortable. Like if you think about where the human body, like how we carry load, like for as long as there's been conflict, you've seen military guys going into conflicts carrying load on their back. Mm-hmm. Very few people have elected to carry load on their chest.
Yeah.
That seems like not a nice place to carry it.
Yeah, I would imagine, although the human body naturally carries excess weight on the stomach, so maybe it's not terrible.
Yeah, true. Have you tested, obviously your Rule 28 went into a lot of testing for it, but have you seen data on hydration pack built into the skin suit as opposed to the external pack?
Yeah, so unfortunately when I went to the wind tunnel with Silka, I did not have the prototype gravel suit yet to test. That would have been a great thing to test. If I had the prototype at the time that we went to the wind tunnel, I absolutely would have tested it, but they didn't have it ready by that point.
Interesting. And I know when we talked, we're kind of jumping back to the tire thing, but when we talked last time, I know you were riding factor bikes and your tires were basically, I think you were running the same tires as me, the 47 Specialized Pathfinders, which was around the maximum tire clearance on that frame. You've moved over to a different bike, Felt. Was that one of the catalysts for experimenting with this wider tire setup?
Yeah, no doubt. So I think the max tire clearance on the Factor Ostro Gravel was 45 millimeters. I ran 47 millimeter Pathfinders. I actually had to cut the side knobs off to make sure.
Yeah, I'm on 47s and it's like, yeah, they're rubber.
Yeah, it's close. So yeah, and then I made the switch over to Felt, and they had a claimed max tire clearance of 50, which I was very excited about. And when that frame showed up, the very first thing I did was I had a wheel mounted with 2.1 mountain bike tires on it, and I immediately put that wheel in the frame to make sure it would clear. It did clear, and I was like, okay, we're in different territory now. Like there's a lot we can do with this bike. That was a very happy day for me, and my head was already spinning with ideas about what we could do with this bike if we could put mountain bike tires on it. And I really do think that is the future of a gravel race bike. A gravel race bike needs to be able to fit mountain bike tires on it, in my opinion.
What else did you learn when you went to the wind tunnel with Josh from Silka?
Yeah, let's see. We tested wheels, tires. Interesting thing on the wheels is that I think a lot of people assume, or maybe there's been some testing previously, that an aero wheel at a certain point doesn't make a difference with a wide tire because, Josh actually coined the term the rule of 105, where the rim needs to be ever so slightly wider than the tire for optimal aerodynamics. And, if you've got a 45 mil tire on a rim that's, 30 mil wide, that's a lot wider. It's probably not doing anything aerodynamically. And at least in our testing, that was just not the case. Even with a 53 millimeter mountain bike tire, the aero wheel was helping, and pretty significantly. Probably not as significantly as if we were testing road tires, because again, with the rule of 105, that would have been optimal aerodynamics, but there was savings to be had even with the widest tire option for deep wheels.
When I talk to the World Tour aerodynamicists, they're all talking about, especially around time trials, they're all talking about the combination. Like there's no fastest tire or wheel. There's a fastest tire or wheel for that frame. And it's the combination of the two. I don't hear that so much in gravel land. I hear people talking in absolutes. This is a faster tire. This is a faster wheel.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think gravel just hasn't gotten to that. Like we haven't caught up to that point yet. I think that's probably still the case, but gravel's just not there yet.
What about bars? I know this is like the historic debate on how narrow we can go with bars. What did you learn around bars? And where's the trade-off with, how do you think about approaching that trade-off with, okay, a 36 is more aerodynamic, but is there a point where you feel like you're sacrificing comfort and control?
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, we tested 3 different bars. All of them are probably narrower than what 99.9% of gravel racers actually use. But it's what I was interested in. So the bars that I was using were Envy's Aero bars that are 36 mil wide. And then I also had a pair of Aero Coach bars that were 32 mil wide, or 32 centimeters wide. Sorry.
Was that the Ornex ones?
I can't remember the model off the top of my head.
Yeah, I know they have like one ergonomically designed bar, which they've wild aero claims about, but they're all internal testing.
Yeah. And then we had a Toot Engineering track racing bar, and I can't remember the width off the top of my head, but it was ridiculously narrow. I mean, it was so narrow that my hands were almost touching each other.
Just about fit your Garmin on there.
Yeah. So, a ridiculously narrow track racing bar. Completely impractical for actual gravel racing, but we wanted to see if there was a difference. Interestingly enough, when I went from the 36 centimeter wide Envy bar to the 32 centimeter wide Aero Coach bar, I actually got slower. And I think what Josh Portner told me is that when I went to that narrower bar, my elbows came out a little bit more than when I was on the wider bar. So, I guess with everything, it depends. And that's what Josh Portner loves to say is it depends. You can go to a narrower bar, but if that narrower bar is putting you in a position where your elbows are coming out and it's actually hard to stay in that aerodynamic position, it might not actually be faster.
Roadman, I know how serious you take your goal setting, whether they're fitness or life-related goals. If you're looking for a powerful ally to support you on this journey, look no further than Huel. Huel has become my secret weapon for when I don't have time to prepare a balanced meal. It ensures I get the nutrition I need without sacrificing time or taste. Plus, it stops me from reaching for that takeaway menu. I always throw a bottle into my backpack when I'm heading into the city to work, and it stops me eating junk convenience foods, snacking on croissants and bars of chocolate, because I know they don't support my training goals. It's a handy, nutritious meal on the go, and it's got over 22 grams of protein. Huel is perfect for athletes that don't have time to cook or prepare food before a training session. It's convenient, nutritious fuel at your fingertips, ensuring you hit your daily fueling needs for that session. Huel Ready To Drink has 26 essential vitamins and minerals in every single bottle. You're getting a whopping 175 health benefits. Plus, it's made from natural ingredients like tapioca, sunflower seed, coconut, and more. The best part, it's the flavors. There's 8 crazy, beautiful flavors. Iced coffee is what's in my backpack right at the moment. You can get Huel directly to your home. All you got to do is head on over to the Huel website, huel.com/Roadman. Running through the rest of the Unbound strategy, this has turned into the full Unbound debrief podcast. The nutrition is one of those areas that we're just seeing. It seems like there's advancements all the time. I talked to Alan Lim from Scratch Labs recently, and he was talking about the concentration of electrolytes in your bottles. It was really interesting because it's the first time I'd ever heard it. I've often used, as I think most people do, thirst as an indicator of how much I should drink day to day and on the bike. But he was saying, thirst and electrolyte signals are interpreted by the body very similarly. So you could have a very highly concentrated electrolyte bottle that's say 500 mils, and you drink that, and that turns off your thirst signals. But your body has just fulfilled the amount of electrolytes it needs. It actually still needs more water. So you could need 750 ml water, but you're not getting it because your body's switched it off and telling you, no, I'm actually not that thirsty anymore.
Mhm.
Really fascinating. I'd never heard it before. So he's saying you need to have nailed that electrolyte balance. Have you experimented around with this at all? It's something I've never played with.
Yeah, I have tested my sweat concentration with the Nix patch, and I've actually tested the sodium concentration of my sweat in the lab too. And it turns out I'm a light sodium sweater. So I don't sweat a ton of sodium. I'm not a super low sodium sweater, but I'm on the lighter end, which I guess is a good thing, because I don't have to worry about it quite as much. I don't have to dump electrolytes into my bottle to get enough. But yeah, I agree that it's something that you should test, and try to nail. Like I know a lot of people suggest like, oh well, if you have salt streaks on your bibs or something, you might be a high sodium sweater.
I
Yeah,
don't know if it's that simple, is it?
you could be, but it's better to test it and get a number and have a better idea, because it makes a huge difference. And there's a huge variation between low sodium and high sodium sweaters. I mean, you could have somebody that sweats 300 megs an hour, or you could have somebody that sweats 2000. Like, it's a huge range, and that makes a huge difference to the nutrition that you have to have on the bike.
I spoke with Ross McGraw on the podcast. He's the president for Core, this heat sensor monitor that we're seeing a lot of the World Tour riders using.
Mhm.
And his contention is that we've gone quite deep down the rabbit hole, especially at World Tour on aerodynamics, that the gains left to be made are very hard won gains that are going to be very expensive. He feels the next generation is going to be in fabrics that are heat tested, so to keep core body temperature down. And the idea of heat is kind of a two sides to a coin, because your core temperature goes up in a race, that's impacting performance. But you can also use heat quite strategically, like we see in Remco in a recent vlog, using heat to simulate the effects of altitude training. Is this something you've played around with?
Absolutely. Especially for Unbound. Heat training is incredibly important because Unbound is usually a hot race, and it's a very long race. And the longer you spend in the heat, the effects compound, the negative effects of the heat compound, and your power output takes a massive dive if you've been riding for hours in the heat. I think people underestimate how much heat negatively affects their performance. It's massive. And I think part of the reason why Unbound in 2022 was such a fast year, despite the horrendous conditions, it was raining that year for pretty much the whole race. It was raining. So you would think, okay, rain, that's got to be slow. Like, we're riding through mud. That's got to be a slow year. It was up until that point, it was the fastest Unbound that we'd ever seen. And I think it's just because riders could stay cool the entire time. It was raining, and it was cool, and power outputs were high. And you see the same thing at for example, Leadville last year was a cool year, and we saw record breaking times as well. The high temperatures in a long race make a huge impact, and that's actually something that I took into account this year. And I did heat training, but also I actually took it into account in my race strategy, and I carried a lot more fluid with me than basically most of my competitors. For example, at the last aid station, I saw most of my competitors were taking two big liter bottles with them because it was only 50 miles to the finish. I took a 3-liter bladder. I had a bottle down the front of my jersey, and then I had 4 bottles on my bike. And only the bladder was for drinking, and all of those other bottles were for pouring on myself and trying to keep my body temperature cool. And I actually think that it made a huge difference.
When you say you're using heat training, were you using it for acclimation purposes to get ready for Unbound, or were you using heat training to elicit a physiological response, like similar to going to altitude?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's both. I would say it's both for sure. Yeah. My heat training this year was usually what I do is I go to Texas before Unbound because it's extremely hot in Texas, and you can ride every single day in 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's great heat training. It got a little bit messed up this year because I had some health issues. I had an abscess in my throat that needed. It's a long story, but basically,
Don't worry, seeing the Instagram picture, it was brutal.
Yeah, I went back home and to North Carolina, and my heat training wasn't as good this year. Like I just didn't ride in as hot of temperatures as I normally do. And maybe that made me more scared of the heat than I otherwise would have been. And that's kind of why I brought all this extra fluid with me. I try to ride during the hottest part of the day. I have done saunas in the past. But yeah, I mean, there's a physiological effect for sure. And it is similar to altitude, I think, mostly in raising blood volume.
Obviously, training intensity and duration, they're highly specific to the athlete, the phase of the season they're in, their ability to, absorb, to use a French word, absorb the training load. But I chatted to Matt Beers 2 weeks before Unbound, and the volume that him and Keegan were getting through was insane. Like I've had, so many of the World Tour riders on the podcast, Mohoric, Fred Roy, all these guys, and they're not getting through anywhere close to the same amount of volume or intensity in a week as Matt Beers was. And I was almost thinking, it's like, has he gone into this overcooked? Has he done way too much? How did you approach volume going into the race?
Yeah, no, this is something that I talked about in the first video I did this year, which was talking about my plan to train for the upcoming season. I was talking about how lifetime Grand Prix athletes, specifically around Unbound, are doing training weeks that even World Tour road racers don't do.
Nowhere close,
Yeah.
Like Jay Vine was doing like 13, 14 hours a week last time I spoke to him. Matt Beers was doing 38 hours weeks.
Yeah. It's crazy. And that's become, I don't want to say it's become common, but there are a fair number of lifetime Grand Prix athletes that a 38-hour week is not, that's just what you do when you're training for Unbound. I did a lot of volume leading into Unbound too. I did a 2-week Unbound block. And last year when I did my Unbound block, I did a 30-hour week followed by a 35-hour week. And I thought I was in amazing shape for Unbound. So my plan this year was to double down on that and go bigger. And I believe I did a 35-hour week followed by a 40-hour week this year. So,
like speaking with, Dan Lorang, Primoz Roglic's coach on the podcast, a lot of people still subscribe to the idea that you're better off being 10% undercooked than 1% overcooked. So how do you find that ideal balance? Like you could do a 35-hour week and easily be overcooked. So how are you judging where the balance is on that?
Yeah, so I will say that my plan was to end this 2-week block 3 weeks out from the race. So 3 weeks is a long taper. That's a very long taper. It's longer than I'm a coach as well. 3 weeks is longer than I ever recommend somebody taper for an event. But I did know that the volume was going to be crazy high. And I actually think that getting sick with this throat abscess may have helped me. And I'll explain why. I got that the week following the end of this 75-hour block. And that week, I only rode my bike for 4 hours. And there was a 3-day period where I didn't ride my bike at all. So essentially, I went from a very high training load, higher than it's ever been, to extremely low training load. If I'm training regularly, a 4-hour week is I might as well have not ridden my bike. It's basically complete rest, right? So maybe I'll try to purposely work this into my training in the future. But I think having that super high training load followed by incredibly low training load may have actually helped me for race day.
Any thought that maybe the throat abscess is related to the huge overload? We've all had that experience of doing a 8-day stage race and you're sick the day after.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, my immune system was probably compromised, and it could certainly be the case that if I hadn't done that insane block, I would have not gotten it. But again, if that high training load followed by that low training load was what got me in shape to get a top 10 at Unbound, then I don't know, maybe it was worth it.
Yeah, it's definitely worth deconstructing that and having a look. I know you're a big fan of strength training as well, and you have some great videos on your channel about strength training. Is that something you incorporate all season round, or do you step away from the gym when you get into this serious middle of the Grand Prix year?
Mm-hmm. I personally step away from the gym in season, and it's mainly because, and depending on which athlete I'm coaching, that advice can change. For example, a master's athlete, I would probably suggest that a master's athlete stay in the gym all year, because the older you get, the quicker you're losing muscle mass, and the more important it becomes to maintain that muscle mass as much as you can. But at my age and with my racing calendar the way it is, it gets quite hard to recover from these events. Unbound, I feel like it takes almost 2 weeks to recover from as it is, and when you've got events back to back, and there are these long events that take 7 to 10 hours, it gets quite hard to maintain the gym work in season. So I do end up letting that go, and that's usually the first thing to go. And that's not to say that there couldn't be some benefit from maintaining gym work year round. I am open to that, and there are a lot of people that are huge. I'm a huge fan of the gym, but there are a lot of people who are huge fans of the gym that when I say I take a step back from gym training in season, they give me pushback, and they're like, "Why do you do that? You could be so much faster if you were doing squats in July." And maybe they're right. I'm open to them being right, but at least from a practical standpoint, it gets to be too much at a certain point.
What's up next? Crusher and Tusher?
Yeah, Crusher and the Tusher is the next Grand Prix race, which is basically a watts per kilo contest at altitude.
But it doesn't seem like a 70 kg man's course.
Yeah, it is a climber's course through and through. It's basically tailor-made for Keegan. I would give the probability that Keegan wins the race at 95%.
Is Keegan a wounded animal after Unbound as well?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think he's the kind of guy that if he has a bad result, it'll actually stoke the fire. Like, he'll come back hungrier. You know, he won't let that shatter his confidence.
Did he ride poorly, or was it tactics that got better of him?
I think a lot of it was tactics, because the group, he was a marked man. If he went up the road with Lachlan and Chad, we would have chased him down for sure. Like, it just wouldn't have gone away. So he can't really do a break, because if he tries to do a break, we're going to chase him down. So essentially what he's got to do is he's got to hope that the front group comes together into the finish, and then he can out sprint all of us, which didn't end up happening. So I think it was a little bit of tactics. The group was not really willing to work with him. They knew he was a marked man. A lot of riders saw that they're still in the group that Keegan's in, and that's probably the group that's going to win. So I'm just going to sit here and do no work, which is fine with me. You're allowed to race a bike race however you want to race it to get the best result you can. And then, I don't know how bad that crash was. I don't think he had any major injuries, but I think that crash at mile 180 or something was the nail in the coffin for his chances.
Did you see it?
So I didn't see it. Basically, Matt Beers and I got dropped right before the crash. And then we came up on Keegan picking himself up off the ground and getting back on his bike. And I was thinking, this is perfect, because I got Matt Beers with me already. And Keegan's going to get back on his bike and join us. And then I've got two of the strongest riders in the race, and we're going to catch that chase group easily. Like, it's not even going to be hard. But Keegan never ended up catching us, which I was very surprised at. And yeah, like I said, I think that crash was just the nail in the coffin for his day.
The way Unbound has evolved as well, it's not suiting Keegan as much, because a couple of years back, it was like this whittling down of the front group, and it was almost like a hard chain gang session where if there's 10 guys in the front, we're all going to agree to just trade off, and when a Darwinian survival of the fittest, we'll see who's left at the line. And Keegan, it seems like, is the strongest rider who more times than not was left at the line.
Exactly. Yeah, I think as the race gets more tactical, and I think it'll only get more tactical from here on out, it starts to not suit riders like Keegan as much. I think the more the race plays like a road race, the less suited it is for Keegan.
Dylan, best of luck for the rest of the Grand Prix. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. Click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.